Okay, welcome to another one of our lectures. This one is going to have some really interesting information for you, um, and I'll tell you where I got the information in a second. Again, I can only touch the surface talking about a lot of these things in these micro lectures. Um, Interested in many of the things I'm going to bring up here, it's probably best to take our police organization and management course or talk to our instructor, such as John Ennis, who major in the Raleigh Police Department and is very familiar with a lot of the things I'm going to talk about, although I'm going to focus on the Durham Police Department for reasons that'll be clear in a minute. Okay, so the reason I want to focus here is that in 2016, kind of the premier law enforcement agency for kind of administrative matters or regulation did a study. Um, and this is the International Association of the Chiefs of Police. It's just been around quite a while, but the good news is they published this study, and I'm providing you a link there for you to look at if you'd like. And if you're doing any sort of research on policing, I highly, highly recommend you look at this report to kind of give you an idea of some of the problems and issues, and I'm going to touch on just a few of them by using some of the charts from this report. Um, Again, this is a 200 plus page report. There's a lot more to it. I can't even touch a hundredth of what's inside of it in 5 minutes. Okay, so the first thing here that is helpful, and we had talked about this in chapter 5, is the structural organization. I realize that if you're looking at this chart, it looks kind of overwhelming and it's big, but again, if you'll go to the actual report and the link that is available here, you should be able to kind of focus in and get a better look. But you'll notice that we have the chief of police here. These are the major units they have, and it goes all the way down to separate individual ones. Again, I realize you can't see a lot of this, but this is the organizational chart, and if you want to get a better look at it, I think going to that report's a great idea. The rest of these charts I think are a little bit clearer. The first one I'd like to show you, and this is really a comparison map, the one on the left side of your screen is a breakdown of the Durham beats and then a map overlaying that with the homicides in the department's area of control. And you'll notice that this is broken down. You can see how these two match, okay? And you'll notice that this was broken down by race, and there's lots of good information about race in policing in this report, as well as gender policing in this report. There's good information touching just a little bit about LGBT and a few things. But this is interesting. If you look at percentage of residents who are black, you'll notice that there's a concentration down here, but you'll also notice that the homicide rates in some areas, like up here, there's a high concentration of African Americans or blacks, but there's almost no reported homicides. But down here is where the bulk of the homicides are going to be reported. Again, if you're doing a report on homicides or race, this is really great information to look at. This is a really good chart I pulled out because it's what's called a heat chart. It's when and where crime occurs. So you'll notice that it's a little bit counterintuitive, but if you notice here that the concentration of crimes, you might think, well, yeah, people are going to mess up most on the weekends, and that's really not true. The peak of crime occurs right here. That's in the middle of the week, and it occurs in the early evening, about 6 or so, because these are based on 24-hour time periods. So if we look at 18, the 18th hour of the day, 6 p.m. So you notice that's 5 and 6 p.m. is really the peak, and it really got a concentration here, although there's some here on Friday as well. The weekend it drops off, except for around midnight on Saturday, and I think that has a lot to do with maybe bars or drinking. Again, really good information for you to see. The next one is, this is a good chart on this, but just a comparison of other cities, roughly the same size, giving their calls for service, that's CFS, how does Durham rank and compare to those cities? And you'll notice that it's pretty favorable. And I'm going to have to cut it. You're probably hearing a little bit of music here, and I want to cut that music. So, my apologies. This is a breakdown of Durham and other cities, how Durham looks in regards to, in North Carolina, their crime rate. And I think this is a great chart for us to look at. You'll notice that total incidences, if you just look at raw numbers, that Mecklenburg's got the most, but it also has a huge population, so that's kind of an unfair comparison. So again, we go to that incident rate per 100,000, which is an FBI standard. And you notice the city that ironically comes off worse than Durham would be Winston-Salem, having the highest incident rate. And if you look at the homicides, which are murders and non-negligent homicides as they occur, you'll notice that, again, Mecklenburg's, simply because the population is really high, but it's quite, again, Winston-Salem for a relatively small population, and Wilmington even more so for relative, has a fairly high homicide rate. The next chart here to look at is clearance rates, are we solving these crimes? So everybody loves to look at the homicide, and again, I refer you, this is broken down by districts and other things, but here's the homicide rate. And it's looking at the 2013, 2014, 2015, and you notice the homicide rate is right around between 60, 64, and 66%, which is pretty close to the national average. So the police are solving about 60% to 65% of all the homicides that occur. A little bit less than you might think if you watch NCSI. I put this one in here because I know many of you are students and are thinking about careers. These are the minimum entry-level requirements to be hired. There's also requirements for promotion and things like that I recommend you take a look at. But you'll notice a high school diploma, 21 years of age, U.S. citizens, no felony or serious misdemeanor, no DUI, no suspension, no use of illegal drugs for the past 12 months, and if applicable, honorable discharge. That'll get you. Basically, this is also down here is kind of the sequence of how you get hired. If you're interested in a career, this is a nice overshot of how it's done. The next one here, one of the last ones here, I believe, is what happens when they mess up. I want to include this because if you look at this, these are total allegations made against the police. So the question is, if you look at these allegations, were they sustained? That is, were they true? Were they not sustained? Was the officer exonerated? Were they unfounded? Were they withdrawn? These are really interesting information, both from citizens' complaints and administrative. So this gives you a snapshot of when people say, well, corruption is rampant or corruption isn't rampant. Well, here's what's been done internally, here's what's come from the outside. And you'll notice that complaints from the outside, and I think this is worth looking at, are not sustained as much as internal investigations. The police themselves, and they don't tend to convict themselves or catch themselves. That's a little bit longer than I wanted to spend on this, but I hope you enjoyed it. I think this is a great report, a great resource for you. A little bit longer than most of my lectures, but we'll pick up with the next one soon.